Hello, my name is Ugo Perego, and it will be my pleasure today to share with you some information and thoughts about what does it mean to have Neanderthal ancestry. Now, some of you might think that this presentation is a little bit of a stretch from why you're here to learn about family history, to learn about genealogy. And if that's what you're thinking about, you are correct. It is a stretch. It is a marginal topic, a very small marginal topic, but indeed a topic that some of you have might have some questions about it. And I know as a genetic genealogist and a population geneticist, that is my training, my background. I have people from time to time asking me how is possible for certain companies to report that type of information when you have your DNA tested. So the objective of this lesson is to shed some light from a scientific point of view, not necessarily a religious Bible point of view. Um, that's a topic for a complete different presentation and discussion. But how is it possible that certain companies claim or affirm that they can provide that type of information with regards to your ancestry? Now, just know that everything I'm going to share with you today is the results of my professional experience of what science says. You don't have to accept all of it. It does not necessarily reflect um, any official position of RootStack. I'm just glad that they invite me to share this thought with you. Now, one thing that I like to state up front, I learned this from my good friend Diane Southard, who many of you are familiar with. She's an expert in genetic genealogy and DNA genealogy. And she once said and shared that uh, perhaps one of the good things about Neanderthal DNA is that it provides a great topic of conversation with some of our relatives that might be more resistant to the thought to have their DNA tested for family history purposes. They might not be interested very much in family history genealogy, but they might be interested in science and more like National Geographic type of information, which might get them interested or curious to have their DNA tested, just perhaps to know how much Neanderthal DNA they share. Now, this is my family, my immediate family. On the pictures to the left is me with my wife and my kids. On the picture to the right, there are also my in-laws. It's a family gallery of about 70 years. This one that you see right here is our last family reunion, where we have all the nieces and nephews together with their parents. It's my wife side of the family, and it is a great family. So this is the type of information, the type of images that we think about when we think about family history, traditional family history. Now, as a scientist, I think about a family gallery a little bit differently, depending on the circumstances. So this is my family gallery for the last 6 million years. Now you can see on the left we have a number of individuals that have been found and discovered by paleontologists, and names have been given to them based on the type of species or subspecies that they belong to. On the very bottom we have the Homo sapiens, which is our species, and then we have the Neanderthals or Homo neanderthalensis, which is our closest relative, and then what is thought to be our common ancestor, which is Homo heidelbergensis. And on the right here, on the top part, you can see the three individuals right there and how they're related with each other. Now, a number of years ago, I was able to go to one of the Smithsonian museums in Washington, D.C., the one about science, and there was a camera there that would take a picture of you and then change your image to see what you would like, what you would have looked like if you were born as a Neanderthal. And so this is my picture right here as a what I would look like if I would be a Neanderthal. The sad things about it though is that it doesn't look much different than I would look if I don't shave for about 2 weeks. So maybe I'm more Neanderthal than the average individual alive today. But joking aside, this is reconstruction is what a science attempts to do to understand the origin of modern humans and the interactions of archaic hominids, which is individuals that look like or similar in features to humans in ancient times. Nowadays, none of these species survived except Homo sapiens, which is our own species. We call them Homo sapiens, we call them modern humans, we call them anatomically modern humans. Those are all interchangeable terms. And that's the common ancestor over there, the Homo heidelbergensis. Now, going back to what is traditional and familiar to us, this is a regular family tree. That's my family tree with my parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. And this is the human family tree with all the individuals that you saw before in the family gallery and the relationship they have with each other. So there are different groups. This is where we are. We stand there with our closest relatives, including the Neanderthals. So Neanderthals are not our direct ancestors. Neanderthals are our cousins, but there have been some inbreeding that took place between the two species. Now, before we talk about Neanderthals, let's create a little bit of background with regard to what science believe, and we think that today science states that chimpanzee and bonobo are apes that are our closest relatives alive today. Now, Neanderthals are closer related to us than chimpanzee and bonobo, but they are no longer on the earth. They became extinct. We share 90%, 98% of DNA in common with chimpanzee and bonobo, and they belong to a subgroup of the so-called hominini tribe, where Homo sapiens or Homo neanderthalensis will have their own branch, and then the bonobo or chimpanzee will be part of the pan group and have their own branch. Now, look at this though. These are other species, the gorilla, for example, are more distantly related. But look how the term the science used. We talk about superfamilies, we talk about families, subfamily, we talk about genus. Genus is a Latin word that indicates family. Genealogy, we use the word genus. Genetics also includes the word genus. It's the grouping of people or family or relatives together based on common characteristics. It could be common ancestry, genealogy, family history, it could be common features, could be DNA that we share in common. And the purpose of DNA testing for family history is to show to us how closely related we are to unknown relatives and how to extend perhaps our family history using DNA. So this is a picture of me from South Africa from a number of years ago and a number of pounds ago. Is a place called the Cradle of Humanity, and there was this monument there, this sculpture, to testify or to show what happened in this place. This is an Italian scientist that spent many years in looking for the different types of fossils and remains that were found in this area. And some of the people think, well, we cannot be descendant from these people, or if we are, where is the common ancestor? Where is the missing link? Well, these statements are by time, these questions have been by time found answers to. Now, I could volunteer myself to be the common missing link between our archaic ancestors that have disappeared and modern humans, but that's not how it works. As I showed you before, there are now there is better information and there are more details that help us tie in together these different archaic individuals. Now, another thing that science does not teach or believe is a linear evolution, that we evolve from in a linear way from monkeys. But what Darwin was trying to teach us is that there is a tree, an evolutionary tree, where different species to different routes as a genetic mutation appear in the different branches of nature of life through millions of years. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is that there is a statement by Darwin which I feel like touches a little bit at home. Again, these are all things that I have delighted with or they enjoy, not necessarily things that everyone listening to this presentation should accept. But the statement by Darwin says that the affinities of all the beings of the same class have sometimes been represented by a great tree. Now, if you change some of these words using words that we are more familiar, and we read this sentence as in the relationships of all the beings of the same family have sometimes been represented by a great family tree. Now, it sounds like we're talking about family history. So, really, the only difference between a scientist or an evolutionary biologist and a genealogist is what time frame are we looking, how wide or how narrow or how deep in time we're looking at these family relationships. But the words, the techniques, the approach are very similar one with another. Now, when we talk about genetic genealogy, we are familiar with the three forms of DNA that are available to family historians. We have the male inherited Y chromosome, we have the female or maternal inherited mitochondrial DNA, and we have the autosomal DNA that provides a glimpse into our ancestry from different type of from the different ancestors that we had. Not all of our ancestors are represented through autosomal DNA, but some parts of autosomal DNA are more variable. We call them polymorphic, more susceptible to changes than others, where others are conservatives and tend to stay the same over millennia. Now, as we meet our relatives, we talk about us being the Homo sapiens and the Neanderthals. There are other type of creatures that have similar features than we do. But we're going to focus on Homo sapiens as and Homo neanderthalensis, which is what the companies are providing information in our DNA reports. So the differences are several. Um, you can see that the Neanderthals are shorter in height, are bulkier. They, in one of my next slides, I'm going to show you how their skulls have different features. Their limbs are shorter and stronger. All of this because the Neanderthal lived in very cold environments in Europe and in other parts of Eurasia. Now, how do we know what the DNA of Neanderthals looks like? Or how do we know that Neanderthal existed? Well, scientists and paleontologists in particular have discovered remains in certain places around the world, particularly Eurasia. That's where we found Neanderthals. And originally, they found only bones, in the pieces of bones. They didn't know who they belonged to, but they know that they look different. So they thought that perhaps these were bones with from an individual that has some sort of physical deformities. Then eventually complete or more complete skeletal remains were found, and we were able to determine that Neanderthals were actually a different subcategory of humans. And here we have listed all the different differences that Neanderthals carry when compared to modern humans, and their differences seems like, as I say, that were traits needed or fit, as we use in science, for the type of environment they live, which was the ice age or the colder temperatures of ancient Eurasia. Now, when it came to the DNA, though, once we were able to determine, scientists were able to determine that Neanderthals was its own group, its own human, different than Homo sapiens, then DNA came around. We were able to, in the early 2000s, to come out with, produce the first draft of the human genome, the complete reading of all the DNA of modern humans, and then later on that of Neanderthals about 10 years after that. And a side-by-side comparison of the genomes showed not only provide confirmation that we are part of different subspecies, but that indeed we carry genetic characteristics that are unique to each other. Now, as I said before, chimpanzee and bonobo share about 98% of DNA with modern humans. Neanderthals share about 99%, so they're closer related to us than we are related to chimpanzee. Based on these genetic differences and on the molecular clock that determines how often these mutations take place, these differences take place, it is believed we share a common ancestor with Neanderthals about 600,000 years ago, probably somewhere in Africa. Now, Neanderthals were the first to leave Africa and came into Europe about 400,000 years ago. What we know from the evidence that we have today, both the genetic evidence as well as the fossils records and the other type of things that have been found in places that were settled by Neanderthals, is that they probably were able to, they walk like we do on feet in an erected way. They live in communities. They had rituals, like for example, they bury their dead. They probably had some jewelry, and some clothing, so they were able to fabricate and create simple tools and clothing to cover their nakedness. It looks like, based on their anatomy and a particular gene that has been sequenced on their DNA, that they were capable of some form of communication. And it looks like also that there was a high inbreeding, so a high level of endogamy based on the um, similarities between the genomes that have been produced to this date. We thought originally that they only live in Western Europe. These are the blue parts that the first Neanderthals remains were discovered. Later on, additional bones were found in both in the Middle East and in Asia, as far as Siberia. And these bones have been sequenced. The DNA has been sequenced and found to belong to Neanderthals and not to Homo sapiens. These other maps show the places, the refuge, where both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens would have lived and shared the same environment. And that's where they probably became in contact with. Homo sapiens arrived in Europe about 40,000 years ago. So there have been a few thousand years where both Neanderthal and sapiens coexisted. Now, about the same time, Neanderthal disappeared, and then Homo sapiens, our species, became to spread also in combination to improving climate condition. But these share places and place and time suggested that there was a possibility for Neanderthal and Homo sapiens to come in touch. And originally, we thought that there was no inbreeding. Maybe the two were enemy. They hunted each other down. They fought. They were competing for resources, and so there was no any type of physical relations that would have produced offspring. This was based on preliminary analysis on mitochondrial DNA, where all the mitochondrial DNA of modern humans is traced back to what is called the mitochondrial Eve, a woman that is the common ancestor to all the people living today from the mitochondrial DNA, the maternal line point of view. The mitochondrial DNA from Neanderthal is very much different, and none of those mitochondrial DNA sequences have been found in modern humans. They are similar, showing that perhaps the population was not very big between Neanderthals. These are 4 different mitochondrial sequences with very few differences among each other, and a lot more differences between them and Homo sapiens. So no connection on the mitochondrial DNA, which led first originally scientists to believe that there was no any sort of physical relation in offspring that came to be from Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. With regard to the Y chromosome, most of the Neanderthals that have been discovered and sequenced were females, with a couple of exceptions, and those exceptions carry Y chromosomes that resemble that of Homo sapiens, which seems like that Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals, but it was mostly male Homo sapiens with female Neanderthals, thus giving birth to boys, Neanderthal boys or mixed boys, from this mixed union that would carry a Homo sapiens Y chromosome. This can change in the future as more Neanderthal males are discovered and their Y chromosome is sequenced. We're interested in autosomal DNA, which is the type of DNA that is provided through companies like Ancestry.com, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, for example, and 23andMe, which I'm going to show you later, provide information about Neanderthal DNA. So here is the big discovery. We call it a love-hate story found in our DNA, where there is some indication that Homo sapiens perhaps replaced Neanderthals and are the reason or one of the reasons why Neanderthal became extinct. But at the same time, we now have evidence that a number of genes or a part of a percentage of the DNA that we carry, it come from Neanderthals, and that's because we've been able to compare the genome of modern humans with the genome of Neanderthals, and we found that between 2 to 4% of Neanderthal DNA is found in Homo sapiens. And so these are the different articles that have been published and explain how we've been able to determine that that is indeed what happened. Um, this is a recent discovery from less than a year ago, where the DNA from an ancient Homo sapiens, so one of our ancestors in Eastern Europe, was sequenced, and we found a higher than normal percentage of DNA that came from Neanderthals in this Homo sapiens, which indicates that it was closer in number of generations to their mixture that took place between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Now, we have a smaller percentage in non-African modern humans because, again, those connections happen in Europe and Asia and not in Africa. Just a very quick, I'm not going to spend any time from it, but the leading company, scientific group that has been produced all this information on Neanderthal DNA come from the Max Planck Institute in Germany, and they have an available free access database for those that like to play with this type of information, where you can select on the left different type of genomes of different groups, different humans, and compare them with archaic species like the Neanderthals or the Denisovans, for example. And you can see then at each chromosome, for example, this is a comparison that takes place at chromosome 9, that the Neanderthal DNA is found also in a French individual and in a Sardinia individual, but not in a Mbuti individual, which is basically, those are pygmies from Africa. And that's because, again, the connections that took place, this relationship took place in Europe. Now, some of you may remember the Genographic project sponsored by the National Geographic group, and they provided certain information with regards to our DNA, including Neanderthal information, the percentage of Neanderthal. This is my own report, so I'm free to share that. This project was eventually retired in 2020, so the only way that you have access now to this information is if you receive an email before 2020, download your infographics and other information they had available and save them on your computer. And that's why I have it here and I can share with you. Family tree DNA provides some information about our ancient origins, but this is when they talk about ancient European origins, it's talking about our Homo sapiens ancestors, which basically are the farmers, the hunter-gatherers, the inventor of the metals during the Iron Age, and so on. Nothing that has to do with the Neanderthals. When we talk about Neanderthals, we have to go to 23andMe. And 23andMe is the first company to provide autosomal DNA testing for family history. If you go to their website today and you click on the tab that says Ancestry, you have many different reports that you can access from the DNA that they tested, including the Neanderthal ancestry, which is what I'm going to talk in the next few minutes. It states for my own report, this is, my report, you can see my profile on the very top here, I have what's called 267 variants or Neanderthal variants in my own DNA. Now, these are single mutation. These are the A, C, T, G that we have that make up our own DNA. So these are individual, these are single polymorphic sites, single bases. Now, Ancestry 23andMe test about 500,000 of those, and of these 500,000, there is a few hundreds that we have inherited from, or we could have inherited from Neanderthals. And of those that have been tested, I have 267 of them that come straight from my Neanderthal ancestry. Again, what does this mean to me? Well, one of the things is that different people have received different amounts of DNA from their Neanderthal ancestors. So in this case, with the people that I am connected with on 23andMe, now everybody is sharing information with me, about those that have decided to share information with me, I am in a situation where 65% of them have more Neanderthal DNA than me, and I have more Neanderthal DNA than the remaining 35%. So I'm somewhat in the low 50th percentile of this exploration. Here you can see the actual graduatory, where I'm about 49 in the list of individuals that share Neanderthal ancestry. And interesting, I have a cousin right here. It's actually a cousin of my wife that has a 98% more Neanderthal DNA. It has more Neanderthal DNA than 98% of the people that it is compared with, which is going to make a great topic of conversation next time I'm going to see him. Again, what's the practical use of that? Well, let's talk about more the specific. So 23andMe, out of all the variants or mutation or individual bases that they test about 2,800, you can see them right here, 2,872 variants, which come from Neanderthal. Now, they are actually half of the number. The reason they are 2,800 is that because we receive one part of DNA from our parents, from our dad, and another part from our mothers, which means that we can receive one variant, Neanderthal variant from our mom and zero variant from our dad, or we can receive two variants on the same position from both mom and dad. And I'll show you that better in the next slides. Now, here is a little disclaimer I like to read to you, found on the 23andMe, as 23andMe provides this type of information. And it says studies have suggested that certain genetic variations inherited from archaic humans may play a role in hair texture, height, sensitivity of the sense of smell, immune responses, adaptation to high altitude, and other characteristics in modern humans. This variation may also influence the risk of developing certain diseases. However, the significance of the Neanderthal genetic variants on disease risk is still an area of active study, and most direct-to-consumer tests, like the one from 23andMe, results currently do not include them. Now, I will show you where I got this quote from in one of the resources at the end of this presentation. But just take everything again with a grain of salt. This is still very exploratory type of information. For example, there has been recently a suggestion that two mutations that we may have on our gene are linked to the COVID-19 predisposition. For example, a mutation on chromosome 3 makes people more susceptible to COVID-19, and also not only to get it, but to get it more seriously with serious complications. And another mutation on chromosome 12, which also we inherited, is a variant we inherited from Neanderthals, is more protective, which means that people will not get COVID, or it seems like if they get it, they will not have very serious consequences. Now, again, these are suggestions based on current data, but it's interesting information or potential information nonetheless. Now, going back to 23andMe, this is the report I received. It says that you have Neanderthal DNA that may influence your traits. Now, understand that the majority of our DNA is not linked to any biological activities. It means it doesn't cause anything. It doesn't produce the color of our hair. It doesn't make us sick. It doesn't influence the color of our skin. We refer to genotypes or DNA that has an effect on our body, meaning the phenotype, as a DNA that is coding for something and therefore produces traits and characteristics. So, of the more than 200 traits that are linked to Neanderthal ancestry that I have, a couple of them actually may cause something. For example, one is linked to my sense of direction, which states is not very good, which I agree with that. Another one says that I'm less likely to have a fear of heights, which I don't know, but I prefer not to know. I'm not going to place myself on a very high building to figure out if that is true or not. But those are the two traits that on my DNA that I would have inherited from Neanderthal based on the comparison to the Neanderthal genome. So here again, this is how it works. The Neanderthal ancestry, so there are 1,400 markers scattered throughout the genome, and one is inherited from mom and one from dad for a total of 2,800 markers. And out of these 2,800 markers that have been tested, I have about 1/10 of them that I have supposedly received from Neanderthals. Now, none of the customers at 23andMe has all 2,800 of them. The maximum found in an individual is less than 500, so about twice the number that I have. Now, it would be interesting to know if there is somebody out there that is actually more Neanderthal and in the way that has been tested as of today. Now, these are my chromosomes. As you can see, there is one line from mom and one from dad, from chromosome 1, chromosome 2, and so on. This is the summary, so 1,436 variants that have been tested, twice as many because of one from mom and one from dad. So I have 16 of these variants that I received from both of my parents, and 235 variants that I received either from one or the other, for a total of 267 markers. And these are where they are scattered throughout my whole genome. So you can see most of them are just from one parent or the other. But here's on chromosome 8, for example, is a marker that I have inherited from both of my parents, and is a marker from the Neanderthals. Now, going back to the two traits, remember a marker is one thing, but not all the markers are coding for something, okay? Of the two that are linked to a trait, this is to show that I only receive it from one parent because the chromosome is depicted in blue and not from the other. This is the variant from T to C, and this is the position on the genome where that takes place, where that occur, and the type of trait, fear of heights, or sense of direction that is linked. What I'm not showing you today, for lack of time, is that you can actually see all the tested markers right here by clicking on this tab, and not only the variants that have been detected. You can see where actually all the different markers that are linked to Neanderthals that 23andMe would test. Now, in conclusion, there are some resources that you can access to learn more. This is from my friend Diane Southard. Her website, Your DNA Guide. She has 2 blog entries about Neanderthal DNA and ancient DNA and genetic genealogy testing. That's where she also suggested that this could be a great topic of conversation with some of your relatives that you would like to have tested, but they might not be very interested in genealogy. Some of the information that I share with you with regard to the origin and nature and characteristics of Neanderthals, including DNA testing on the mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome, come from this website, which you can find a lot more details if you want to study more the topic of Neanderthals. And this is a great reading, a great book by David Reich, which talks about our ancient origin and relationship to other archaic individuals. Now, in conclusion, Neanderthals are genetically and physically distinct from modern humans but are more closely related to us than chimpanzees are. They are our closest cousins. The Neanderthals and modern humans, human lineages diverge about 550, 600,000 years ago in Africa, and then eventually they met again a few 100,000 years later in Eurasia. So far, we have no evidence of Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA lineages in modern humans, and the only Y chromosome that we've been able to find and sequence in Neanderthal show the origins of being from modern humans. However, the autosomal DNA is what we share in common. Neanderthals were not as genetically diverse among themselves as modern humans were at the same period, indicating that Neanderthals had smaller population size, which might have led to their extinction. Neanderthals have contributed between 1 to 4% to the DNA of modern humans of Eurasian descent, mostly toward the 1% and 2%. And their DNA is linked to some of our traits today. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy learning about this information. And if you have any question, feel free to contact me. Bye bye.